Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South. On this episode, Eric Fawcett, GatorCountry.com, Burner Ball, various spots. Going to be joining me. We're going to break down everything you need to know about the Final Four, Florida and Auburn, the SEC regular season champion, the SEC tournament champion, meeting in the Final Four in what will be, I mean, it's safe to say, since this has never happened before, the biggest game in the history of Southeastern Conference. There has never been a league game in the Final Four, which kind of makes by default this the biggest game in the history of SEC basketball in San Antonio. Eric, man, it's Final Four week. It's finally here after all these months.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff, and again, it's kind of nice in the flow of the tournament that often sees the quick turnarounds from a Thursday to Saturday or Friday to Sunday and all that. It's kind of fun to have those moments and just have things really roll along that way. And it's also kind of nice to have the opportunity to like really look forward to a game and the build up that comes with a win on the weekend and a week until the Gators play on Saturday. So yeah, in enjoying this, and I'm sure everyone's enjoying taking in all the content, both from us and from Florida people, as well as getting the opportunity to see the national coverage, because that's always fun too. Is if you're a fan of a team, getting that extra attention from being one of the last four teams standing.
Yeah, I mean that's the cool thing about being in the Final Four is if you get to the Final Four, they're talking about you Monday, they're talking about you Tuesday, they're talking about you Wednesday, they're talking about you Thursday. So, I mean, it's free media for your program, and everybody says something good about you from Monday to Friday, right? Like nobody says anything bad about you when you're in the Final Four, and if you lose in the Final Four, they still don't really say anything bad about you on Sunday. You were in the Final Four, and that's all that matters. But to me, there's almost nothing like Final Four Saturday. Like I have covered World Cups. I have covered college football playoffs. I have covered all sort of sporting events. And like the only thing to me that really is comparable is a World Cup. But even a World Cup is a little different because, at most you're going to have two nations at like one site. It's not like they play a game and then a couple hours later, like Germany and Netherlands take the same pitch, like Final Four Saturday is the coolest thing because it's four schools and, with the exception of maybe NC State last year and the occasional wild Cinderella, like everyone that gets there thinks they're going to win the national championship.
Yeah, at least this year for sure. And I think that's something that's good is, as much as people, it's kind of funny as much as when there's a Final Four that has some Cinderella teams or even Cinderella teams that make the make the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight. There's people that are like, oh, this kind of sucks because then they get blown out and there's not very good games. And now there's been some people that are not super happy about there being 4 1 seeds. And while again, I don't know if it's great for the sport if this was just what happened every single year, that it was just 1 seeds every single year. This year it certainly feels fitting where there was times where Auburn was considered to be one of the best teams in college basketball's ever seen. Then Duke has kind of taken that title of like, look at this KenPom ranking and how this might be one of the best teams college basketball's ever seen. Then you've got a Florida team that's beaten that Auburn team, and a Houston team as well that has also gotten some marquee wins as well. And it's just one of those things that while I don't think this was the most exciting of NCAA tournaments that there's been, it has the opportunity to maybe have one of the most legendary Final Fours. And I think that that's something for the sport. I'm hoping for. I know, of course, Florida fans will want to have Florida win by 100 in both games and have zero stress. But for the sport, I think there's a opportunity for this to be quite a legendary final 3 games. And again, hopefully something that whatever rates well, if you're into that, or at least just has a lot of attention from people who aren't maybe prototypically the biggest fans of the game, and just becomes a good showcase. So if you're someone in that boat that's found yourself having your eyes wander from the screen when there's been some blowouts here in some of the recent rounds. Hopefully it's all made for, or hopefully it makes for a really legendary Final Four that makes up for it.
Yeah, man, I sure hope so. And it's amazing. Like Florida at this Final Four, this is Florida's 6th Final Four, and Duke's been to 18. Houston has been to 8. And then there's Auburn. This is their 2nd one, both under Bruce Pearl. So at least 3 of the programs at this Final Four have been to more than 5 Final Fours, which already puts them in super exclusive company. And then Houston has never won, but if Florida wins the national championship, they'll have a 3rd national title. So they become the 8th program to do that, which really does also put you in elite company. Like there's a lot of things that are kind of extraneous to the actual event that make this Final Four so compelling. And that's before you even get into the fact that so I, just for this purpose, and it's not a knock on Torvik. I love Torvik. And I'm going to use Torvik in this show when we get into Auburn a little bit, but the KenPom database is older. So the fact that the KenPom database goes back to 1997 and you literally have 4 of the 10 best teams in the database at the same Final Four. I mean, if you can't get pumped about that, what can you get excited about? By the way, Eric rocking the Stadium and Gale shirt here, and the Days of Thunder NASCAR Florida hat, which is that's real strong. A real strong look. So for those of you that end up listening to this in the podcast form, which will be almost all of you, I gotta say,
right,
you're missing out.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's going to be, I am just interested too. As much as I said, I don't know if I want this to be the future of the NCAA tournament. I really feel like it might be. Which again, I was someone who was, to be honest with you, quite a Houston detractor relative to their KenPom numbers and just kind of general really wins. So I do think they ran into the perfect matchup where, to be honest, I didn't really love Tennessee either, and they kind of play the same style. So Houston got to win at best on best. So I'll just be honest with you. I don't particularly feel like they're still not necessarily in my 4 best teams, while I know that people would be like, well, look at the numbers. They say they're, so I understand that, but 3 teams that, 3 teams and a half, because I still do think Houston's really good. We will see. And that's my one fear. I know I have said that I'm hoping for 3 close games, and it could be that way for the Final Four and national championship games. I kind of think Duke rules Houston. Not that we need to talk too much about that one, but I am pretty excited, and I do think that whoever ends up winning this year, I mean, there's going to be no doubt about it as well. You even can still look at some national championships and you're like, man, things just really broke this team's way, or they got lucky here. And, there's minor moments of that in terms of luck there, but there's always going to be in sport. But I do feel like whoever wins the national championship this year is going to have one, really for the record books. And even if it's not because it's a Final Four national championship game that are overtime thrillers that end on a buzzer beater, just the inherent fact that, like you said, with the analytics being the way they are, and even the way that it's not always that analytics and eye test totally match. And I do feel like everyone in the college basketball space, whether they are more analytically focused or they are eye test, I do feel like everyone is in agreement that this is one of this is the strongest, if not one of the strongest Final Fours of all time. And for Florida to be a part of that, that's pretty cool, because whatever happens here, it's something that Florida's always going to have a part of. They're going to get a piece of the floor to go put up in the practice facility, and it's always kind of interesting to me that the Final Four has become kind of a thing. I mean, again, I'm not a big college football fan, as people know. I mean, I love college football, but I'm no expert. But it's always funny to me that in the 4-team college football era, you'd have teams that would get killed in the semifinal game, and then everyone would like laugh at them, like, wow, this is like embarrassing, like, which like that doesn't really happen in the Final Four. And even if like I said, I do think Duke is going to I would predict Duke beats Houston somewhat comfortably. I'm not saying I think Duke is going to win by 25, but let's just say Duke won by 25. I don't think anyone's going to be like, wow, Houston's a fraud. They're Mickey Mouse, like, because they've got there, and there's a respect level for that. So again, I mean, I remember after last year when the Gators lost in the round of 64, I was one of the people that were like, that didn't think it was a successful season. I thought it was a frustrating season. I know a lot of people pushed back and didn't agree with that. And I kind of thought going into this year, there was going to be a time where we'd have to think, okay, well, what is a successful year for Florida? What does that constitute? And yeah, we're at the point where it's unquestionably a extremely successful season for the Gators, even if they, God forbid, were to lose in, quote unquote, embarrassing fashion against Auburn, which I don't predict, but even if they did, no one's going to clown them.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't get hammered for losing in the Final Four by anybody. It's just not something that happens. Even last year when like NC State lost and was not terribly competitive in their national semifinal, like the narrative was, what a job by Kevin Keats, what a run. This was so much fun. Obviously all that can change in a year, but it does not change in a day. Certainly if you make the Final Four, you get your flowers. As I look at my phone buzzing, which I should have turned notification off because I just found out the Hornets beat the Jazz, and every Hornets win is just like 1,000 cuts at this point. As we prepare for Cooper Flagg to move on. And I know you all really cared about that. Jared pointed out this is the narrowest margin between the highest and lowest rated team in the Kim Palm era pre-tournament rankings. The average difference from the highest rated team to the lowest is 10.92. This year, it's just 3.11. That's amazing. I mean, like, the competitiveness level at this Final Four, it really does excite me. I don't know. Another thing that I think is super interesting before we get into Auburn a little bit is like Houston and Auburn. So Houston was a proud program, right? They had been to, I think this is the second time they'd been to the Final Four under Sampson. So they had been to 6 Final Fours, but all those were like in the 70s and early 80s, and there hadn't been much since. And Kelvin Sampson takes over that program in 2014, and they build it back up into this monster that they had been to the NCAA tournament. That was the number. They'd been to the NCAA tournament once since 1992 when Sampson took the job. Now they've been to the Final Four twice in his tenure. Auburn, they had finished in the top 4 in the SEC twice since 1997 when Bruce Pearl took over. So the Ken Palm era, they've now been to the Final Four twice. Florida's going to the Final Four under its 3rd coaching staff, joining kind of a small cadre of programs that have done that. The number is smaller than you think, not bigger. And then Duke and John Shire, the 37 years old, the youngest coach since Billy Donovan to take a team to the Final Four. Pretty good company there. And obviously it's his program now because he took over for Mike Krzyzewski, was Mike Krzyzewski's handpicked successor. They obviously probably should have made the Final Four last year and didn't. And now they are in the Final Four and kind of the prohibitive favorite, despite the fact that they're not the number 1 overall seed. And in fact, the number 1 overall seed right now is a betting underdog to the Gators.
Yeah, certainly was interesting to see once those lines came out. And I do think, honestly, like, if this is the time we transition to Auburn, it's fitting because I was really interested to see what the bookmakers would think of an Auburn team that has had 2 faces to it. The team that was just unbelievably dominant for months of the college basketball season until the moment that they completely locked up the SEC. And again, I know that we've talked about it at length and for good reason. I mean, the fact that Florida's SEC tournament championship is impressive in a year that the SEC is stronger than it's ever been. The fact that the SEC was stronger than it's ever been and Auburn won the regular season with 2 games to spare is absolutely outrageous. And I honestly don't feel like that got enough coverage. I know that there was like great debates over who should be coach of the year, and a lot of people were not happy that Bruce Pearl won it over Todd Golden. I mean, I can understand slightly what people are saying. To win the strongest SEC that it's ever been by multiple games and going 15-1 to start. And again, it's kind of unfortunate, honestly, that they didn't have to be competitive in the last 2 games and lost it, because I'm really curious what the record would have been if they were actually taking it seriously. But whatever it is, much like Florida winning the SEC tournament was really impressive. What Auburn did was incredible. But it also shows that once you turn the switch off, it can be pretty difficult to turn it back on. And for them to not try at all against Texas A&M, playing this crappy zone that they haven't played all year and just staying in it despite getting killed. And then to see again losing to Auburn, where they went a little deeper in their bench, and then you saw in the SEC tournament they struggled to turn things back on. And then I do think in the SEC or the NCAA tournament, I mean, they started pretty slow against Alabama State. And then, beat Creighton, who I think is really good, by 12, but I don't really feel like they played that well. And then I do think they played a good half, good point. And then I do think they played pretty well against Michigan. And then I did think they played really well against Michigan State and were looking like the team that was so dominant for so long. So I do say that all to say of like, I could see for the odds makers, like, what do you do with a team like that is one of the teams. And I that, like, dare I say, I don't know if I 100% believe the analytics like a KenPom, just because they didn't try for 2 games, lost some of their juice in the rankings because of it. But then at the same time, like, when they were trying, they did play poorly coming out of that. But it's the team that I think is the biggest, like I feel like, well, I mean, it helps that we cover this team, but I feel like we know what Florida is. I feel like we know what Duke is. I feel like we know what Houston is. Auburn is the one team out of those all 4 of those teams in the Final Four that I truly think could win the national championship or lose in the Final Four by 25. Like, there is not a world where I think that Florida loses this game by 25. There's not a world that I think that Houston could beat, Houston by 25 or lose to Houston by 20. Like, there is only one team that I think could completely get crushed in the Final Four or win the tournament. And that's Auburn. So it's a team that I will struggle. I struggle at the moment to know what the Gators are going to see. And of course, the Janai Broom injury is going to be something that adds to that ambiguity.
I'm going to get to Bull Gators' comment here in a minute. That's sitting there. I'm not going to post it yet. I'll read it since we're technically recording this podcast for the public at large as our podcast Final Four preview. If you want more exclusive podcast type content and more detailed Final Four breakdowns, I've got a lot of stuff planned. I'm sure Fawcett has stuff planned. We haven't even really talked about it. We're just kind of throwing stuff up on Patreon when we have time. But we do have a film study preview that Eric did that I thought was fantastic. I watched it before this podcast a couple hours ago. Go to patreon.com/FloridaBB and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And make sure that, you support the show. Thank you, Eddie. That's great, man. I'm so glad that you joined the Patreon here in our comments section. We appreciate all of you who have joined. Tell a friend. Pound subscribe on our YouTube channel. Thank you all. But there'll be a lot of really great exclusive content. And I did want to shout out, like, that content's going to continue. Like, Florida has not been involved in the transfer portal. And I'm not going to talk about the transfer portal too much on the Final Four show. I'm not going to drive Fawcett nuts by doing that, I promise. But the point is, the Patreon, there's work to do when the season ends. Like, there will be portal stuff. There will be names. Florida actually will be in contact with some people. They are not right now. There are maybe one or two exceptions to the rule of who they're not in contact of just being not in contact with anybody. And that's all I'm going to say about it, is that Florida's really focused on this particular team and trying to win a championship right now. And so they're really not terribly engaged in the portal. So we will get into that when the season is over. Plenty of reasons to stick around the Patreon. $3 gets you most of the stuff. $5 gets you all your content. $2 is going to keep you getting your game previews. You get your film study for Auburn if you're in the $2 subscriber tier. So make sure you subscribe. Here's some interesting stuff about Auburn, because I generally agree with what Eric said. I will make two additional points. One, I thought they tried really hard against Tennessee in the SEC tournament. I thought they played a pretty good game, actually, and just got beat. They only had 6 turnovers. The one thing they didn't do great in that game was shoot the ball. They were 6 of 21 from 3. Denver Jones was 1 of 5. Miles Kelly was 3 of 8. The main thing was Tahad Pettiford went over 5 with Meshack chasing him around. And it was kind of like they have those 4 shooters that all shoot. I think they all shoot over 37%. And they all have over 75 makes or 7. No, that's not true. They all have over 50 makes, which is still pretty good. But Pettiford was the one who couldn't get going in that game against Tennessee. But like Johnny Broome played 34 minutes, had 23 points and 7 rebounds. Chad Baker-Mazara did not get thrown out of the game or commit a technical foul that made everybody insane, as far as I remember. They tried very hard to win that game and lost. Otherwise, they had not played a good game, really, since their beatdown of Kentucky at Rupp Arena, which won the SEC championship. And, of course, they ended up winning the SEC by only 1 game, but that was because they didn't try in the last 2 games. They just didn't. And I know a lot of people think that they played real hard against Auburn, and I heard a lot of media narrative about the Auburn-Alabama game, and, Auburn wanted to win this game on Johnny Broome Day. And I feel like that's probably true, but Auburn didn't play well in that game. How they may have wanted to win very bad to send Johni Broome off a winner, but they didn't play well. And the numbers bear that out, which is kind of point 2. So entering the Final Four, one thing I do, and this is where Torvik is interesting, is you can see the chinks in both Florida and Auburn. None of these teams, not even Duke, is perfect, right? And the numbers kind of bear that out. I mean, you look at Torvik since March 1st, right, which was the day that Auburn clinched the SEC when they won at Rupp. Auburn is 9th in Torvik. That is the worst of the 3 teams at the Final Four. Houston is best. Florida is 2nd. Duke is 3rd. And then Auburn is 9th. And Auburn is 25th offensively and 22nd defensively. And those defensive numbers have improved, but there's a narrative right now, and this is the first question for Fawcett as I make these 2 additional points, that Auburn has kind of found itself defensively again. And while I can appreciate that argument, because I thought in particular in the Michigan game, they did guard great in the second half, which is the only reason they won, because they didn't run good offense in that game, really. And they, like Florida, were down by 9 points in the Michigan game. Now, that was their Sweet 16 game, not their Elite 8 game. But they were down 9 with 10 minutes to go. Florida was down 10 with 7 to go. So a pretty big comeback for Auburn in a game that they won by 13 because they guarded great, and Michigan got 17 points in the last 11 minutes. So did Auburn find its defense, or did they just have the benefit of being the number 1 overall seed and play 4 offenses that aren't great? Well, it can be a little bit of both. I mean, the best offense, at least efficiency-wise, that they played in the NCAA tournament was Michigan State's, and they played great defense in that game too, I thought. Held Michigan State to under a point per possession. But I would say the team that runs the best stuff is Creighton. And, the reason they beat Creighton was because they guarded in the second half after not really guarding well in the first half. They're almost a little like Florida in the sense that, I don't know how many times Florida has put together 40 on defense. but Florida will guard you for 20 minutes here and there. Florida will guard you for 25 here and there. Duke and Houston just suffocate you, right? Even Gonzaga, like it took forever for them to get going against Houston. And when they finally did get going, it's because they stopped running offense and just kind of attacked mismatches. So what are your thoughts on what is improving? Is it the defense? The numbers say that, right? A little bit. Because their efficiency number now on Torvik in the last since March 1st is 22nd. Going into the NCAA tournament, it was 51. So they're clearly guarding pretty well heading into the Final Four.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Some of you will have seen the Bruce Pearl interview. I forget who he did it with, but used a word that will not be repeated on the podcast, but suggested that his guards were not shy about being able to guard up, and again, something that again I feel like is so impressive about this Auburn season. It again is the fact that like I don't think they're that talented. Like they have some good players, don't get me wrong, but like. And that's another thing that just strikes you when you go back and watch the game where Florida crushed them in the regular season. It just feels like Auburn does have to play like their margins are going to be a lot tighter than Florida's because they don't have the same speed and athleticism and positional strength at the guard positions that Auburn does. So I do feel like Auburn's defense is not particularly it's not like it's crazy sophisticated or they do anything crazy, but they are a team again that's not super athletic or big in the guard spots or wing spots, and they will end up switching a lot and having their guards battle with bigger players and have some of these again big bodied guards big men that aren't great athletes to go slide their feet with guards. And again, I feel like even when their defense was whatever bad when they weren't trying, like it still was. Like you said, it was like in the 20s. It was, which again is still a lot of good defenses in the 20s. So I feel like their floor is still fairly high, but I do feel like there's just like a bite and an intensity to when they've been guarding at the highest level. And I kind of feel like they have to have some of that aggressiveness just due to the fact that, again, they don't have just your prototypical stoppers up and down the floor. And I do think that Michigan State is not a team that, like you said, I just don't like at all how Michigan State plays. So I don't look at that one, but I do really, really love all that Creighton does. And Creighton, again, that doesn't have much athleticism. So I do feel like it was a little bit easier for Auburn to switch. And again, I think that's going to be really interesting to see. And this is where honestly the film study was really interesting, just to see how they were just aggressively trying to deny everything for the Gators, and Florida got a whole bunch on backdoor cuts, and it wasn't just always the cut, but the way it ended up spacing the floor for different lanes, or they would hit the kind of almost like a short roll backdoor cut that turned into a spray out three. And it almost felt like I was kind of watching that, almost thinking like, man, if I'm Auburn, I wouldn't be trying to like take Florida out of all these actions necessarily. I would try to probably play them more straight up. And so I'm pretty interested to see what happens there. But it was an example of like, just like how their defense was so reliant on a lot of intensity and aggressiveness one-on-one. And when they suddenly, it's, whatever, Todd Pettiford, who's a good player, but is quite small. When he's trying to do that against bigger, more physical guards, that could be a challenge. And when you have some of these bigger bodied centers trying to go out and pressure Hauk, that's not a great matchup. So definitely this was one of the more interesting film studies for Patreon for sure, just in terms of watching that game and thinking about what'll change. But that's kind of my thoughts on the defense. But again, it is kind of hard when they play Michigan State, a team who I just like don't like their offense at all. So like it's like definitely Auburn defended pretty well, but to what extent is that getting to feast on a Michigan State team that wasn't great? Another example of just like, yeah, that's why you work for the number one seeds. You get some advantageous matchups like that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling somebody today on one of the radio spots I did, I said, man, Florida has to be glad they got a 1 seed just based on what happened to Alabama and Tennessee. Like just getting that 1 seed ended up being immense. And again, I've pointed out that I think Florida had the second most difficult path to the Final Four, other than Houston. And I agree with Eric on Houston. Tennessee was a great matchup for Houston. Purdue was not really, especially in Indianapolis. And you saw what happened. I mean, they needed a buzzer beater to win that game, and they had a similar scare to Florida. It was just kind of in reverse because they went way out in front of Gonzaga. And like I said, Mark Few, at some point they stopped running as much stuff. Eric probably followed that game a little more closely than me. But Gonzaga like attacked mismatches, which is what Duke's going to do. And Gonzaga was scoring at a pretty nice clip. And it was one of those games where if college basketball was 48 minutes, Gonzaga moves on. But it was 40, and Gonzaga kind of ran out of time pretty much. But the point is, like, they had to play a really good Gonzaga team, and they had to play Purdue in a road game, and they got through. Auburn just didn't have that path. I mean, again, like, I don't think any of those teams are particularly threatening offensively, except for Creighton because of how good of the stuff they run. And Creighton this year they played 6 guys. Like, that's it. And didn't have any sort of elite athletes that can really test Auburn, like Eric said. Bullgator said he's more worried about Auburn without Johnny Broome. I'll get to that. I don't agree with that. I do think that they run stuff through Johnny Broome, Janai, a lot, obviously. But I don't think it's beneficial to them to not have Janai, especially against Florida. So I'll get into that a little bit. What I will say is, like, Michigan State still was able to hit back cuts. Like, Jackson Collar had 17. Michigan State scored 24 points in the paint in that game. And a lot of them were like dunks, to be quite honest, because like that pressure comes at you. They're very aggressive in their ball pressure. And then it was like, could Michigan State make reads properly and like exploit that? And sometimes they could, and other times they didn't. Michigan State also missed 12 layups, which I've seen Spartan Twitter going absolutely nuts about today. So Michigan State and Tom Izzo had adjustments for what was happening, but the main thing Auburn did was kept them out of transition, which, if I'm a Florida fan, I'm thinking about. Like, will Bruce Pearl and Auburn be disciplined enough to play a different type of game against Florida than they did in the jungle? That's what I want to know. And we've seen Bruce Pearl do that to Florida before, right? And I know a lot of you are going to say, well, Micah handlocked an injury, and that's fair. But Auburn did not want to run with Florida in the SEC championship game a season ago. They said, all right, you guys run with us the first time, that's fine. We are going to slow things down and make this a physical half-court game. And Florida was not interested in that fight. Now, whether they weren't interested in it because Handlockton got hurt or they just weren't able to do it, I think are kind of questions that are tough to separate, Eric, but fair to ask, right? And so that's just my opinion. So I'm interested in how Bruce Pearl will approach this game and whether, they kind of make it slower and think that they're not going to run with Florida. And the other point is, and this is the last one I'll make before I, ask Eric kind of his thoughts on it, but like Auburn's bench has also shrunk since they played Florida. Like Chris Moore was a pretty meaningful part of their rotation back then. And like he's played 3 minutes and 9 minutes in their big NCAA tournament games. Like he's not really a part of their rotation. So right now they're playing 7 with Chaney Johnson and Pettiford kind of not in that order coming off the bench, and that's it. And Florida is going to play Auburn now with Elijah Martin available and Micah Handlockton available, players that weren't available in the jungle. It'll be interesting to see if Urban Klavzar, who hit some dagger shots, particularly when Auburn like iced ball screens. I think Eric pointed out one where Walter Quayton made a stupendous pass out of an ice screen and Klavzar just hit an NBA 3, and it was just, really deflating for Auburn. Will Urban get some run? He did not look good against UConn and has not seen the floor since, except for what he had a cameo against Maryland, and it also went poorly. So we'll see. But your thoughts on that, Eric, and maybe Auburn's smaller rotation and kind of the impact that could have.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another reminder that like I don't know. I always just say like when people are getting fired up about Florida's 9th, 10th, and 11th men going to the season, it's always just like, hey, you like this is what I say every year. I'm like, it's gonna be 8 players max. And even though a lot of people were pretty high on Klobsar, including myself, it's just another reminder that like when it gets down to nut cutting time, as Todd Golden would say, you're gonna have 8 guys. And certainly it was interesting to see like a rough Chinyelu game. We'll see. I'm curious to see what happens to him in this one, just because again, this is a front court on front court battle for sure. So yeah, that is an interesting one. I didn't think about the fact that Hanlockton is now going to be in the game, and they'll need a couple of those guys to be competitive. I do think that's going to be a really interesting matchup too with a Hauk in there, just because he's someone who is quite the mismatch offensively with his straight line drive speed versus bigger bodies like a Chaney Johnson. But then you can see that again on the other end, and you saw kind of both of that against Texas Tech, where I do think Hauk had some really good moments guarding in isolation on the low block, but there's also times he just got bullied. And again, you're asking a guy that's certainly just not his game to bang with below the rim post players on the block, but that's what he's going to have to do because again, I think that at this point it's pretty clear who not just fans, but also Golden trust the most, because again, it just seemed like he was trying to hide Chinyelu out there and just couldn't get him off the floor quick enough in a couple of moments. But yeah, it's just another reminder that when it gets to this part of the season, it's time for your it's time for your best players to be your best players, and the team whose best players are the best players is probably going to win. I just don't see this as a game. I mean, and hey, if I'm wrong, that's great, but I just like don't see this being a game where it's like Denzel Aberdeen is the hero or Micah Hadlockton is the hero. Like if we're talking about a national championship game after Saturday, I think it's just going to be because Walter Clayton and Alex Condon and everyone was all the starters were the best versions of themselves, and well, starters plus Hauk for sure. But yeah, I will be I'll be pretty interested to see that. And again too, it's like this Florida game is going to be probably 2 hours and 45 minutes in the Final Four now, which is also, I'm actually quite happy. I know some people are like, oh, of course Duke got in the primetime slot. I understand that. I'm actually happy that Florida gets to play the first one. You know when your tip off is going to be, and you don't have to have that game of waiting for the first one to be done. So yeah, that's something that I think you need your but yeah, again, I think it's going to be a game that's played pretty methodically. Those TV timeouts are going to feel like an eternity, and I think that you're going to be able to play your starters a ton, with the limiting factor just being fouls as opposed to fatigue and I suppose injury with again Alex Condon maybe not being at 100% and Janai Broom probably not being at 100%. I know he didn't practice today, as in Monday. It sounds like he's going to play for sure. It's just going to be the matter of what state is he going to be in.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this, get into this question from Bull Gator. Longtime Patreon too, so we appreciate you. He said, I'd like to hear Neil and Eric go back and forth about Amart, how he affects the Auburn game. That's a good question, I think. And he gets into the fun back and forth all year with Fawcett and I that maybe has gotten a little overblown on Twitter. It's not like Fawcett does not like Elijah Martin. He thinks he's really good, right, Eric? Yeah, look. Here's the interesting thing to me, and let's see if Fawcett and I have a disagreement here. This isn't like, I'm going to borrow from my buddy Max Barr at Southeastern 16. Like, this is one of those where you look at the last box score and you go, man, maybe this guy's due, or maybe this guy isn't going to have that happen again. And to me, like there are two players that really stand out. One is Denver Jones, who was 0 of 4 from the field, had 2 points, both on free throws, did have 7 rebounds, but had 3 turnovers and was really bothered by Will Richard. Really bothered by Will Richard in particular, who chased him around like a banshee for most of that game and just didn't let him get loose. And then the other guy is Will Richard, who was 2 of 9 from 3 and like was a little frustrated, but that wasn't Denver Jones. That was whatever matchups he got because Denver Jones was trying to track Walter Clayton and didn't do a very good job of it. I think Denver Jones will play better against Florida in the Final Four. This is just my gut feeling, whatever, just this guy's due Max Bar moment. The question I have is what role do they give Elijah Martin? Like, is he chasing Tahad Pettiford a lot? Because, I mean, I don't love that matchup for Elijah, to be honest. Pettiford is quicker. He's the kind of guard that can get downhill and into the paint that has given Elijah a little bit of trouble. Like, I'd rather have Will Richard chasing Tahad Pettiford, and I'd rather have Elijah Martin going primary on Auburn's point guard, Denver Jones, and saying, hey, we're going to make this frustrating for Denver again, because that's a much friendlier matchup for Amart to me. And then, you know, in terms of Florida's offense, I think Elijah's been really good offensively in the NCAA tournament, kind of taking what defenses give him and really almost looking to penetrate and drive more first. I know he had some wide open threes against Texas Tech that he missed, but he didn't take any bad shots. Having watched that whole game again this morning, I thought Elijah Martin played really well against Texas Tech, honestly. But I do think, like, if your thought on Elijah back is, oh, we're going to put him on Pettiford and that's that, then that is not what the plan will be. I can almost assure you it will be Denver Jones and Miles Kelly duty for Elijah.
Yeah, and it's like it would have been interesting, of course, if Florida did lose that Texas Tech game just to for a number of reasons and the things that we discussed. But I mean, one of them was like in the first half, they called 2 plays for Elijah Martin to run pick and roll, and he turned the ball over in both of them. Like that's one of those, and that's one that like at this point I don't blame Elijah Martin. If you're putting the ball in Elijah Martin's hands to run a pick and roll, that's your fault. So that's one of those ones I'm just like, I don't know why Florida does that. But well, they did, and they didn't do it past that, but it was just another, like, again, we're not learning anything new at this point of the season. That's just, unfortunately, Elijah Martin is just not a playmaker, not someone with ball handling and court vision to make those kinds of plays. And again, you saw it in Texas Tech. They called 2 plays for him to run pick and roll. He turned it over twice. And then they didn't do that for him anymore. And again, I don't mind at all the missed threes. I thought he took good ones, like you said. So I'm always going to be happy for him to take good catch and shoot threes. And then he did have, of course, a run out in transition, threw it down with authority. Like that's just got to be his game a little bit more. I think he's there for his defense, can catch and shoot on open ones and bring some just general intensity and leadership. And again, like the margins are too fine here to like Florida had a timeout and called a Elijah Martin pick and roll out of it. Like cannot be that can't be the best thing that as an offensive coach you have in mind. Like that can't happen in games with higher importance. And again, that Florida survived this one, but it would have been pretty easy to look back if they didn't, be like, what are you doing? So anyways, that was I still do feel like I've said this about Will Richard for years now, but I feel like he's someone who's just like, when you look at his stat lines and his kind of production, a lot of it is just more the product of how the team is doing as a team offensively, because if the team is operating well, he's going to find open shots. And if not, he's going to be quiet. And again, I just kind of feel the same way about Elijah Martin. I don't feel like these are guys that Florida should be force feeding opportunities for. Would love to see some more screening actions for Will Richard. But I think with both of their stat lines, you're looking at them as more of kind of the thermometers that are saying how well Florida's offense is playing. And I do see the initiators and the the engines, in addition to Walter Clayton, being Alex Condon if he's healthy, and Hauk, because again, I think Hauk has a nice offensive matchup against whoever he's going to be going up against, whether it is a Janai Broom or a Cheney Johnson again, and that's going to be challenging for him on the other end of the floor. But offensively, I think you have to use him a lot for that reason. And I am less enthused at the idea of Florida trying to win a Final Four basketball game with Elijah Martin as having plays ran for him. To be quite honest, it's just not his game, and we've just seen it over and over again. And they survived some tough moments with it against Texas Tech. And yeah, you just you hope he plays like not the guy who had pick and rolls ran for him, but the guy that took some good open threes that unfortunately didn't fall. But I liked every single one of the looks.
Yeah, and he was great against Maryland, right? He hit 3 of them and didn't turn the ball over because they didn't try to put him in pick and roll opportunities against Maryland. I'm not sure what they, saw or thought they saw against Texas Tech that made them think that was a good idea, but it has repeatedly not been all year. And I do think I'm right about, I don't know if you mentioned the defense, but he has primarily guarded, and they did it in the A&M game, and I thought it was smart. Like Andrzejczyk and Golden put Elijah on Zurich Phelps a little more and just said, we're going to trust kind of Denzel and Will Richard to handle Wade Taylor. Because I think with Zurich, Elijah was a lot less worried about the jump shot, right? Like, so he knew that when Phelps got the ball, he was going to look to drive. And that's a way for him to kind of prepare for that type of player. With Pettiford, you really have to be careful with both. And I just don't think it's a great matchup for Elijah Martin. Jared says, it feels like we've had some mediocre and then excellent scouts this year. Which coaches or the staff are better at that? Who has the scouts for these 3 teams? I don't actually know. Well, actually, I do know who has the scouts for 2 of the 3 teams. I'm not going to talk about that because I'm just not going to do that. But hit me up in back channels, Jared. In terms of excellent scouts, yeah, they have. The Auburn scout was very good. But I think part of the thing with the Auburn scout was they didn't have to worry about what they were going to do with Martin defensively. Look, if it's not Denver Jones, I'll eat some crow on Sunday, win or lose. But I think Elijah's going to be on Denver Jones, Miles Kelly duty, and they're going to have Will Richard and Zell chasing Pettiford, which makes way more sense to me. Eric.
Yeah, and again, not the most prototypical team in the sense that they do play so much through the front court that it's not like they have these point guards that have the ball in their hands a ton. They're not a team that runs a ton of pick and roll. When they do run pick and roll, it's a lot of this kind of side Spain pick and roll that they've popularized by being really effective, but they kind of flow out of it like a set or as like a set play, as opposed to something that they run a bunch. I actually should have looked this up out of curiosity, but that is something that makes the matchups more interesting, just in the sense that their team is not your prototypical college basketball team that's got like your point guard that runs all pick and rolls, and then a downhill spot up guard that's gets the ball swung to him and you have to be worried about dribble penetration. And then like your small forwards, just a shot maker. Like they're just all kind of like a bunch of combo-y kind of guards, which is not always a benefit, but because of their style of play has been a little bit more. And then I think, of course, the other question is how much Florida is going to want to switch when Auburn does their flex screen type things or any kind of slice screens to get big men going towards the rim. And I think that's also going to be interesting relative, especially to like an Elijah Martin, who's of course quite stout for his listed height. And I'm also, so I'm going to be curious if whoever they have Elijah Martin on, is it going to be someone like a Miles Kelly that's going to be setting a little bit more of those of some of those flex screens, with the idea being that if you do have to switch, you have a little bit more size, as opposed to, you don't want Walter Clayton down there with Cheney Johnson, who's just going to put his shoulder through his chest and try to pick up a foul.
Right.
So yeah, that'll be an interesting kind of gamesmanship as well, both in terms of matchups and does Florida just kind of generally speaking, does Florida try to switch or not? And again, that's one of the things that is just interesting to me generally about Auburn is like, and we talked about 100 times, you don't need to break it down more, but like the fact that when they were killing everyone, they were flexing everyone to death. And it feels like they literally got like tired of that. And again, it's to watch the game where they got killed by Florida. It's just like they were hardly running that. And I still feel like they're not running it enough and have gone more to just the straight isolations for Janai Broome. And you saw it be good against Michigan State, and he was fantastic. But in the SEC tournament, I think that was a big reason why they lost, was because they were just like force feeding these isolations in the mid post for Janai Broome. And while Janai Broome is really good, I don't think he's like so dominant that you just have him 15 feet from the rim and in isolation that he can score. It's like why to be honest, I'm still kind of floored why they haven't gone more back to that straight up flex. And I honestly do wonder if this style of offense that's known as being a little bit, dated in some ways and not sexy to a lot of people. I'm like, yeah, maybe they truly did get tired of running it. But truly, if I was Auburn looking at how to play against Florida, I would spam that all day, try to get these guards switched on, see if you can get Walter Clayton stuck on a big man. Maybe he picks up a foul, and just play that kind of power basketball. But again, I almost was like watching it work with just these mid-post ISOs for Janai Broome against Michigan State. I was like, this might be like okay for Florida, because while Janai Broome is really good and while he was scoring in these isolations, I like if we're gonna say Janai Broome's gonna isolate 25 times in the mid post against the Gators, like sign me up for that versus them running flex 25 times and catching the ball 2 feet from the rim. That's just my opinion, and it's still been that's kind of one of the great things that's confusing to me is why Auburn has gone away from the offense that was so good for them. And I do wonder if personalities are involved and players are some players that wanted a few more shots are like, man, why am I screening all these big men just for Chaney Johnson to duck in all the time and get all the glory? I wonder what happens, because that's the other thing watching them play that now versus when they were killing everyone pre-Florida was their very structured offense that has turned a lot more into some of these isolations for like a Pettiford that you were talking about, the guys that can make shots and it can be electric. And Chad Baker Mazzara, when he's on, is a tough pick and roll ball handler because he's 6'7" and can pass over the top. But I just if I'm Auburn, I'm getting back to the meat and potatoes here of what they were doing when they were dominant. And if so, that's when you start to have more questions about what Florida's going to do defensively.
Yeah, no, I think that's great stuff. Last thing I'll say about this game is like, and it's weird. It's kind of a mirror of what Eric said about Auburn, but like, this is going to sound so cliche, and I'm fine with it, honestly. Like Rob Duster was talking about the nonchalant assassin nature of Walter Clayton, and I made the like John Wick reference today that like he's the John Wick of college basketball, because he's just like, as Tommy Houck said, he's a cold man. And like Walt Clayton's ability to do what Fawcett was talking about him needing to do in a Patreon video a month ago, by the way, is why Florida's in the Final Four. Like, and yeah, I mean, credit the rest of the team, credit Tommy Houck, especially in the Texas Tech game. But like, Florida can play better than they've played in the NCAA tournament. They just can. Like, they have this season. They did against Tennessee at the SEC tournament in particular. They played great in that game. They only had 8 turnovers. They ran good stuff. They guarded their rear ends off. I thought Florida played great in the second half against Maryland, right? And, I'm less sympathetic to the distracted arguments and just think Florida played really well, and Maryland was not able to compete with them once Florida started clicking on all cylinders. But the Gators have averaged 13 and a half turnovers per game in the NCAA tournament. They need to value possessions better. And that means that like they need to not have unforced error turnovers. They need to not have lazy entry passes with guys like Chad Baker Mazzara and Janai Broome out there. And Denver Jones, one of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball. Like, they need to not get stripped and have it lead to Auburn dunks. Like, there are things that Florida can do better. And so if you're a Florida fan, maybe you're thinking like, well, heck, they haven't played great and now they're going to the Final Four. Like maybe they're due to play really good, right? Because they haven't played that good, quite honestly. And if you look at the Torvik numbers, they're still third of the 4 Final Four teams in Torvik since the NCAA tournament started, but they're 52nd in defense. Now, of the 4 Final Four teams, they have played easily the best offensive basketball teams, right? They have played a number 5 offense in Texas Tech. They played a good offense in UConn, a top 15 offense. They played a top 25 offense in Maryland. They played good offensive basketball teams, but they haven't guarded well for 40 minutes in any of those games. And, you know, at times they have not been particularly great at defensive rebounding either, which shouldn't be a problem for a team with the front court that Florida has. And Alex Connon is another guy who maybe not going to be 100%. Hopefully he will be, but he can play better than he's played. So is that a long-winded way of saying, like, if Florida wants to win the national title, they got to play better? Yeah, it is, I guess. And maybe that's cliche, but like, I'm also right.
It's somewhat funny how the bracket broke where on the one side you've got an Auburn and Florida team that have both not played up to their potential, or potential maybe isn't the best word here, but I just don't feel like they've played their best basketball.
Right.
And now you've got a situation where you're like, it's just like, it's very curious what you're going to see. And then on the other side of the bracket, you've got Duke, who's playing their best, absolutely, in my opinion, and a Houston team that, again, I don't love, but I think they're playing to the absolute max potential of what they could be. So it is just kind of interesting how that has shaken out. And yeah, I think that's kind of it seems to be the consensus among Florida fans that it's almost encouraging. Not that everyone wanted the Gators to play poorly. I think that people would prefer that the Gators played better and won some of these games a little bit more comfortably without needing heroics. But I feel like most people find that it's fairly optimistic that the Gators could get to this point without playing particularly good, and that they are due for some positive regression and be in good shape. But it goes a little bit to that some of these X factor things and some of these psychology things that'll be that are tough to quantify. But as much as I said, I didn't think that I thought this was going to be a close game. I mean, yeah, like if one of these teams, like if Auburn does come out like Auburn came on the regular season, then like, yeah, it could get ugly. And it certainly makes for, like, I think this is definitely the more interesting of the 2 Final Four games. Again, maybe we'll see Houston surprise me and give a better effort. But this is going to be, it's going to be a fascinating one. And 2 of the best players in college basketball, in Walter Clayton and Janai Broome, who play drastically different styles. I think this is something that everyone should really enjoy spending the week looking forward to. And I'm happy that so many people are going to be there for the Final Four, and hearing people talking about securing their tickets, hearing actually some people that called their shot like a month ago and got their put down deposits on hotels in San Antonio. My hat goes off to you people, like all of Jake Winderman's friends and the repairman and all that called their shot early and got those hotels locked down. And actually Jake is going to be there as well with the CBS crew, so shout out to him, and going to get to see that level of production while he's going to be desperately trying not to let his Florida fandom ruin his opportunity with the company. But that'll be big. But it's I do think that's the one thing I was thinking about earlier that I didn't get out totally, is that for people who are able to go, I mean, you've got tickets to what might be the most talented Final Four ever. So, I mean, of course, everyone's there for the Gators and all that, but even just from a college basketball fan standpoint, I do think it's going to be incredible to see this Florida team that's one of the best ever. This Auburn team that was playing like one of the best teams college basketball has ever seen for months. A Duke team that has now taken that mantle, and a Houston team that has found a way to be right there with them in the metrics. So this is fun stuff.
Yeah, man. Can't wait to get to old San Antonio. San Antonio Riverwalk's going to be lit. I'm glad I didn't know Jake Winterman was going either. So now I gotta hit up
Yes,
Jake and
in an official
find.
capacity. So don't be
Okay.
don't be getting him too fired up in front of the CBS executives. That'll get him thrown out of Go
Well,
Gators or chomping or something on in front of the objective observers.
I'll try to make sure that like it's a situational thing where no one's on duty.
Mhm.
Like we could just enjoy some libations and talk about all the reasons Gary Parrish hates Florida, right? Like clearly thinks the Gators are the worst team of all time and just wants Florida to lose every game. It couldn't be more obvious at this point that Parrish and Norlander actually has Gator hater tattooed on his upper arm. Not many people know that, but I'm breaking that on Florida Basketball Hour tonight.
Yeah, so I'll also mention I'm assuming you won't be able to do this, Neil, because you'll be at the game. But for those of you on Patreon that did join for our pregame hangout before the Elite Eight game, which I thought was super, super fun. Sorry it came together late, so some of you probably didn't even see it. But yeah, I will be doing another pregame hangout, probably about half an hour before the game. So I guess 5:30 Eastern. There'll be a Zoom to join, and we'll just hang out and talk about the game, and everyone can get out their nervous energy there. So that'll of course be for Patreon supporters. And I just thought it was so much fun the first time. Had to definitely do it again. And Neil, I don't know if you will be making an appearance, but yeah, 30 minutes before the game, I think you will be firmly situated in your game watching position for that. But yes, I know that. And again, I know a lot of you will be in San Antonio, but for you, for all of you like myself who will not be there, it'll be fun to have a quick hangout on Zoom beforehand.
Yeah, no, I had a blast on that thing. And if I can, I will, at least to say hello. But yeah, just an incredible season, 34 wins and counting. The Gators going after number 35 on Saturday. It's tough to beat a great team twice, but it is a favorable, like honestly, like Florida matches up pretty well with Auburn.
I'd rather play Auburn than Duke in this situation. Would rather see
Yeah.
Duke in the championship than the Final Four, that's for sure. So if we're talking about,
I'd rather play Auburn than Houston right now, just
okay,
because.
Houston's playing their best.
Well, like the way that Florida has played in the first 4 games, a Houston team that is methodical and would just make it a game in the dirt, in the mud, or whatever. Give me that on Monday night on short rest when you've got the adrenaline rush of playing for the national title. And national title games can sometimes just be total chaos, quite honestly. And that's not me. That's a Jay Wright thing. Like he said, then they played North Carolina for that national championship game. Like they did a video to kind of scout it. Of course, they had their video sessions with their players on Sunday. And he said, we went out there, and in the first 20 minutes, he said, I don't think we did more than 2 things that we talked about in the film study. Like it was just like we ran our offense, and like we knew that North Carolina did certain things, but we didn't guard any of the things we told them to guard like well at all. They got out in transition. The point is, like, those title games can get super scrambled at times. They're not always as methodical as the ones Gator fans remember, like the one in 07 where Billy Donovan's plan was to throw 4 bodies at Greg Oden and never double and just make sure that they contested jump shots, and it worked. Like not every time in the national title game do you perfectly and flawlessly execute a game plan to win a game. There's a Patreon of that game, by the way, I think that Fawcett did. So if you join the Patreon, you can go back and watch a little 2007 national championship Florida-Ohio State action. All right. I'm going to let Eric sign us off. Florida's in the Final Four. This has been an incredible season. Thanks everyone that supported us and subscribed. Patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour. Eric, send us away.
Go Gators and keep attacking closeouts.